Welcome to Compassion in Action, where advocacy meets real change, fighting for justice, equity, and healing, because every voice matters.
Welcome to Season 2 of Compassion in Action. I'm Angela Weston, co-founder and educational director of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, and I'm honored to kick off 2025 with a conversation that is critical to the future of medical cannabis. This podcast isn't just about cannabis, it's about advocacy, justice, and action. Our mission is to highlight the fight for patient rights, healthcare access, and policy reform. And tonight, we're diving into one of the biggest battles happening right now, the DEA's rescheduling hearings, and what this means for medical cannabis patients, businesses, and advocacy moving forward. Our guest tonight is Steph Sherer. She has been leading the charge for medical cannabis reform for over 2 decades as the founder of Americans for Safe Access. ASA has been on the front lines of advocacy, challenging federal interference and pushing for policy changes, including some of the most aggressive dispensary raids in history. Tonight, we'll break down the DEA hearings, ASA's advocacy efforts, and what we all need to do next to ensure safe access for patients. GMCS is proud to be an ASA affiliate, and this conversation is all about how we move forward together. Now let's dive in. Steph, welcome to Compassion in Action.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Now, Steph founded ASA, and it was founded in response to federal crackdowns on medical cannabis. We just watched some footage from the Obama's administration crackdown on dispensaries. I'm going to pull that up. And so we're going to talk about that, the origins and the history of the federal interference.
What I'm not going to be doing is using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue.
Despite the Obama administration's claims that it would not circumvent state medical marijuana laws,
what the president said during the campaign, you'll be surprised to know, will be consistent with what we will be doing here in law enforcement.
Raids occurred on 2 West Hollywood dispensaries in March 2011. Reason TV arrived at the Zen Healing Collective to find the storefront shut down and agents from the Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles Police Department, and the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration hauling out boxes from the back. According to a DEA spokesperson, warrants served were federal, and law enforcement took 1 individual into custody, which may result in arrest. This occurred only a week after a vote authorizing California to tax medical marijuana. It's still unclear why Zen Collective and alternative herbal health services were targeted for raids, or if Los Angeles is in for more raids in the near future. Agents at the scene refused comment.
Are you with the Sheriff Department or the DEA?
Yes.
Can we talk to somebody?
No.
There were more
Wow.
in Los Angeles, by the way. A lot more.
Wow. That's a lot. That's really a lot. But I just want to ask you a couple of questions, especially specifically to that too. So ASA was created in response to the aggressive federal enforcement against state legal medical cannabis. So what was happening at the time when you took this action?
Yeah, so actually what was happening was under the Bush administration, Bush 2, and Bush Jr. And there were actually about 11 collectives in all of the United States. They were mostly in the Bay Area of California. There were a couple very small ones here and there, but the larger ones were mostly in the Bay Area. There was actually one in Inglewood, California. A good friend of mine ran. But basically, after you kind of have to back up to when under Clinton, actually, when California first passed its medical cannabis voter initiative, and those laws were just criminal exemptions, right? So basically, what they say is, if you have a letter from your doctor and you show it to a judge, they'll drop the charges. But there weren't arrest protections. There was no access, right? It was literally just a compassionate use, basically, right? A criminal exemption. So, but the Clinton administration lost its mind, right? And the Attorney General at the time came out and said that they would prosecute any doctor that wrote a recommendation. And again, there was no access at this point. It was literally just a state saying, we're not going to criminally charge you. But that law in California passed in 1996. And when I became a patient in 2001, there were actually 8 states that had passed similar legislation. And these collectives were actually not operating legally under state law, under local law or federal law, right? They were, committing federal civil disobediences to come together and provide people medicine. I became a patient. Actually, my neurologist brought cannabis up to me as an option. I never would have thought of cannabis as an anti-inflammatory. And I grew up in Texas, so I thought cannabis was brown. Like, it was not something that was part of my life. But my 80-year-old neurologist came in one day and asked me if I smoke pot. And I told him I didn't. And he asked me if I knew where to get some. And I asked him if I was his youngest patient, because I thought he was trying to score weed from me. I had no idea what he was like. He was like, no. He said, I don't really understand it, but I have 2 other patients that have a similar intolerance to anti-inflammatories. And we're running out of options, right? You can either not take the anti-inflammatories, which, after about 72 hours, I lose a lot of mobility. Or he was guessing I was about 6 months out from dialysis if I stayed on the regimen I was on. So I was in my 20s, my early 20s in San Diego. I just called like friends of mine that listen to reggae, and I was like, "You smoke weed, right?" And it works, right? And obviously, I had a very privileged experience, right, of having friends that could find it for me, but also, they probably let me bum off them a little longer than maybe they would let other people. And then I had to go to their dealers, and, it wasn't necessarily a scary experience, but it was embarrassing, to have to chase down a skater kid to like find my medicine. And, I worked in PR at the time, and I remember showing up at this Walgreens parking lot to get cannabis. And the kid wouldn't sell it to me because he thought I was a cop, because I was in a suit, because I had just come from a press conference.
Okay.
Right. So I was like, as I'm like crying in this parking lot, this little kid, and we're like, no, you have to sell it to me. And so I'd heard about these collectives up in the Bay Area, these patient collectives. I had a friend up there, and I, went and visited, and it was amazing, right? There were people there that answered my questions. There was different, modes of ingestion. And then I used a credit card, so it felt very legal. And then I ended up moving up to the Bay Area to be closer, actually, to that access. And I was there for a couple months, and one of a cultivation site was raided in Oakland. And that's when I realized, like, oh my God, these people are committing federal civil disobediences. Like, this is no joke. And, I had I'd never worked in cannabis policy, but I was a social justice activist. I did a lot of global justice work, and I'd done some prison reform work. There was an amazing organization in California called Books Not Bars that did a lot of youth work, and we did some fun direct action trying to stop prisons from being built in California. Another story for another time. But But the one thing I did know about the war on drugs was that, because 98% of people plead guilty, it's just a churn, right? Like, it just self-perpetuates itself, and all these people are making money off of it. We were actually at one time trying to organize this campaign just to have people plead not guilty at their arraignment, because just that would close down the system, right? Like just that hiccup. And so here I met these people who were consciously, openly committing federal civil disobediences and facing, 40 years to life for the amount of cannabis that they were dispensing and had on the premises. So I was pretty impressed. But I also realized that while their heart was there, they maybe weren't exactly protecting themselves, right? And so once I understood that that they were committing these federal civil disobediences to bring people like me medicine, and that I could just see what effect that would have on the war on drugs, to have people blatantly saying, no, these laws are wrong, we're going to break them. And so I remember I blew up the sentencing chart for cannabis, and I was like, so you understand, like, you were talking about 10-year, 40-year mandatory minimums. I said, if this is really what you want to do, I'm going to create a movement to protect you guys. And at the time, Asa Hutchinson was head of the DEA. So this is under the Bush administration. And that's actually where we got our name. We were Asa. Just to think, go full circle. When Asa Hutchinson became governor of Arkansas, when he ran, there was medical cannabis on the ballot with him. And he did not come out against it when he ran for governor. So a nice little decade.
That's amazing.
Is that crazy? But yeah,
that is amazing.
A great time. These people were, it felt like any moment, someone was going to kick in your door. And, these raids, so raids are really their search warrants with dynamic entry is what law enforcement call it. And so dynamic entry means that you don't wait, right? You just come in with guns drawn and, make a lot of noise, get everybody, scared on the ground, and secure the premises with a lot of yelling and a lot of fear. And then you start, questioning people and arresting people. So one of the first things that I did was with a group of activists I'd worked with, we took a Know Your Rights training that had been taught to me actually by civil rights activists about basically how to get arrested, right? It's like these role plays of like how to have a successful law enforcement encounter. And so we modified it for people working in the cannabis space. So, it's just a lot of practicing, like walking away if a police officer starts talking to you, like, asking what your rights are, knowing what they are, and then really practicing saying, I choose to remain silent, I want to speak to an attorney. And probably did 1,000 of those trainings over the years. And then we organized an emergency response plan. So when we started ASA, there had only been about 11 raids total and federal actions. And under our watch, there was over 400 raids, and we held over 320 raid responses.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
a lot. So you're basically saying, so you were saying that you were teaching people how to get arrested in a sense?
Yeah,
or what they need to do.
Yeah, and to be safe, right? And we we still do that training. I actually just gave a modified training for some women's rights activists who are dealing with people without birth control. But it's basically, a way just to prepare for what happens, right? When you get arrested. And, even though there were some prosecutions, there definitely could have been a lot more if people hadn't been prepared, because again, a raid means that they don't have enough information to arrest you. It's a search warrant, right? Like they're looking for something else, right? And so, so if everybody just shuts up, right, then they're not going to get more information, right. And so, and there's all tricks, you see it on TV, but you're not really prepared for it. Like, cat's out of the bag, like you say something and they're like, oh, you gave yourself up, you better just tell us everything, or good cop, bad cop. But we also, part of our raid response was that we had these intake forms for everybody that worked in cannabis businesses that were basically what to do if they were arrested. So did they need somebody to pick up their kids? Did they need somebody to go water their plants? Did they need somebody to feed their dog? Just to make sure that they could just be in that space and not feel like, oh, I'm just gonna talk because I gotta go. Like my kids. Right. So yeah, it was a lot of organizing, and that was really just to keep people safe. But also, I think we all know that law enforcement are better behaved when people are watching, and so. In the early days, we had a listserv and phone trees. And then as we started using text messaging, right, we had these text chains. So people would sign up. We all had signs in our cars that said, DEA is taking my medicine, or DEA hands off my medicine. And I slept with my cell phone next to my head for 14 years until we passed the CJS amendment, because I was the trigger for the raid responses. So it was definitely an intense time. And that was sort of the public part of what we were doing. And then in the background, we were removing barriers that were, keeping us stuck in this, with cannabis both being prohibited under the Controlled Substance Act, but also, barriers keeping it from moving forward as a complex botanical medicine.
Wow. So basically a lot of what you were doing was helping people to minimize the fear. So of course, when you're in fear of what could happen, what you need to do, all of that, that's when you begin to start talking. And so at that particular point, if you minimize that fear, people are a lot safer, and they can keep a clear head and know exactly what to do. So that was good to have them prepared for that. It's a sad occasion that we had to have something like that. But however, having that preparation prior to and understanding what your rights are is very, very important.
Patients are still in danger. And one of the things that we did already this year, because, I don't want to talk too much about current events without my blood boiling, but, I'll just say there's a lot of really scared people in this country. I think that's what we saw this election. And, animals only hurt other animals for two reasons. And one is to eat them, and the other is when they're scared. And so, there's a lot of profiling and stuff going on with the borders and immigration. And so, we still have all of the Know Your Rights information up on our website. We have a whole section on knowing your rights, and we just retranslated a bunch of it into Spanish. So if you work with any Spanish-speaking patients or those communities, I think they're probably the most at risk right now. And we also translated the travel guide. We have a travel guide for patients, how to safely travel around the United States. And it was a project that we had sort of half done. And as soon as we saw what was happening with immigration, we just moved those to the front of the project.
Yeah. So I do have a question for you from your perspective. What has changed, if anything, since those early battles? I mean, are we still seeing history repeat itself today?
No, I mean, I would say things are pretty different. I mean, when I started Americans for Safe Access, I couldn't get a single doctor to speak to the media, right? Or we actually created this series of educational booklets for patients, because the only thing that was out there, it had cancer, glaucoma, MS, all in one. And if you were a patient, I have dystonia. I don't know that much about cancer, right? I'm not gonna, when I see a long list like that, I'm like, that's some snake oil or something, right? But so we basically created these booklets for each condition because we wanted patients to take it to their doctor, right? And have something that they could talk about. And if you give a list, of all these conditions, it can scare off a doctor, right? So, so I had these researchers and doctors work with me to put those together. And I couldn't get any of them to put their name on it, which is funny because now, people are jumping over themselves to take credit. Right?
Yes.
That's a huge difference. The other thing that, and this may seem subtle, but I might actually cry talking about it right now, but this last session of Congress was kind of brutal for us. I think you had, I know you and I have talked about that, but one of the, and a lot of it was just misinformation, right? That was on Capitol Hill. But coming back onto Capitol Hill, it had been a while for me. When I went into new offices, and asked to speak to whoever's working on medical cannabis in their office, they gave me their health policy staff. And that may not seem like a big thing to you, but for 20 years, I could not meet. They would give me their judicial staff, and I was like, I do not want your judicial staff. I want this is health policy. So
yes,
that is it's really amazing. And no matter what happens with the rescheduling hearings, and honestly, those rescheduling hearings weren't going to do anything for us anyway. The whole process wasn't, except for one thing, and we already got it. And that was FDA and HHS finding that there's currently accepted medical use in the United States. And that was the best that we were going to get as patients, and we got it. And so I think part of a lot of the work I've been doing this year and kind of reformulating our campaigns. And I think when I saw you in DC, we were starting to talk about this at the Validated Voices Summit. Is like taking off that defensive, cloak, right? Like we've had to wear this defensive armor where patient advocates, the first 20, 30 minutes of a meeting is justifying that our medicine's medicine, right? That I'm not a doctor, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a pharmacist, right? But I know I can move, I know that I'm 25 years into a dystonia diagnosis, and I'm pretty freaking healthy. So I think that really changes, right? Like if we all know this is medicine, right? Then the next challenge is, how do we get this to people? And I think that's really where I think we're feeling a lot of that disconnect in the States. And I know you guys are going through it right now.
Yes, really, we are.
Yeah, but I'll say, so I know you wanted to hear about the rescheduling hearing, so I can give you a little update, like get a little.
Yes.
Okay. So, so first of all, I think that this is going to be controversial, what I'm about to say, but I think if HHS would have come out with Schedule 2, that the DEA would have been fine. All of these anti-marijuana groups like SAM, they would have been like, okay, fine, Schedule 2, right? But the fact that HHS made this Schedule 3 recommendation, and I know there's some weird politics behind why they decided that, it was too much. It was too much for the DEA. It was too much for all and they like literally blew their mind, right? Like I think they were expecting Schedule 2, and so what we saw happen, when first the HHS findings leaked, right, and then a little bit later, the Department of Justice, put out the notice that they were in fact starting the rescheduling process for Schedule 3. That you saw the DEA, through the process of sorry, I'm trying to think of there's all these terms for the paperwork, but basically the Department of Justice, and usually the DEA does this, is they post a notice to reschedule, and that starts a public comment period, right? And in that notice is where you see the Department of Justice kind of going through HHS's findings with the DEA. And if anybody read that, you know, seeing exactly what was going to happen, right? Like, I feel like, I mean, people just don't read things anymore, right? Like, I don't think people even read any of it, right? Because it's not even, I mean, the Department of Justice wasn't even saying just Schedule 3. I mean, there was a lot of other things in their recommendation. They said move cannabis, the flower, and the extract into 3. But they added this new definition of THC Delta 9, naturally derived, in Schedule 3, and they left all this stuff in Schedule 1. And nobody was really talking about that. And I think part of it, what I was not prepared for, because I'll say, I've been working towards, you know, having HHS and FDA say the words currently accepted medical use for 22 years, right? And I wasn't just sitting around waiting. Like we had to create an international patients coalition to change the scheduling in UN drug treaties so that HHS could utter those words, right? Like we had to create product safety protocols for a illegal supply chain in order, right? Like it was a lot of work, right? And so on my chessboard, when I heard those words, you know, the music from Wizard of Oz was gonna cue up, like that, and the White House was gonna invite us in, right? And we were gonna come up to Congress and figure out how to get this medicine to patients, right? That was what we were working towards, right? We didn't want it on any of those schedules. We know that cannabis needs its own schedule. Also a controversial statement, but instead, we didn't hear about patients at all. In fact, the story broke at HHS in August of 2023, and then in March, I guess, of 2024 is when the Department of Justice posted their proposal, and then in September of 2024 was the first article that we got to mention patients and rescheduling. I mean, is that crazy? Like,
wow. That's very crazy,
right? And so here's what happened: is that the companies that are publicly traded, they really control a lot of the news cycle right now. And part of it is that they have staff, they have PR staff, and there just aren't a lot of reporters right now. I mean, in the last 4 years, we've lost over 8,000 reporters. So what that means is that often, reporters will just grab a press release and print it, right? They don't have budgets for investigative reporting. And so the sexy stories that came out of rescheduling, one was that this was a ploy by Biden to get reelected, and so they kept saying it was going to be rescheduled before the election. You remember that? So there's a process for rescheduling, and there was no way in hell that we were going to get through that process before the election. It was totally crazy, right? And so what happened with that misinformation is that it created a resurgence in the anti-cannabis lobby, right? Because so it created a partisanship that wasn't there, that we had broken down. I mean, 90% of Americans support medical cannabis. There's some Republicans in there. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is a bipartisan issue, but really that act, right, of calling it a political move by Biden, it created this huge schism that we're gonna be feeling this year. And then the other big news story, which was also misinformation, was that Schedule 3 was going to save cannabis businesses because of 280E. That it's code, right? So yes, if cannabis was Schedule 3, then the 280E would no longer apply. But that's not the only tax law right? And so here's the information is that if cannabis was Schedule 3 tomorrow, all of the activity that's happening in the states, medical, adult use, all of that, it's still illegal. We're still operating completely outside of the Controlled Substance Act. The only Schedule 3 substances that are legal are ones that are prescribed by a doctor, that are in pharmacies, that are FDA approved, right? And so just think about it, like people who sell purple dank, right? They're not able to deduct their business expenses, right? And they're using a free substance, right? And mixing it with the Jolly Rancher or whatever. I don't know the recipe. Not really. I really don't know the recipe, but I was just watching Mo the other night, so I saw him make it. But yeah, I mean that's an illegal Schedule 3 substance, right? And people are selling codeine, right? So in this country, if you make $1, you owe this country taxes, right? Like no matter what you're doing. If you are a prostitute stealing cars, our tax code is very clear. You owe taxes. I think the most famous case of that is Al Capone, right? Like that's Al Capone. That's the way they took him down, was that he didn't pay his taxes. Not murdered a million people, right? So there's also a very clear tax law that says that you cannot deduct business expenses if you are bringing in funds illegally. I mean, it's clear as day, right? And so, so again, that was misinformation to raise stock prices. For people to think like, oh, this is coming around. But the sad thing about this, and I've seen this a couple cycles in cannabis businesses, was that the reality is that people are hurting, right? Like. We were not supposed to be in the state model this long, right? Like, and that's a whole other story. But nobody's making a lot of money. Even the people who say they're making a lot of money aren't making a lot of money, right? They're not breaking even, and they have huge debts coming up in 2026 that's going to tank those businesses. So this idea, though, that the banking bill, that's another big myth. That thing is never going to pass. Occupies a lot of space.
More act
cops that are like, okay, any day now. Oh, Chuck Schumer just got up and talked about banking. So any day now, we're going to be able to get a loan for our business. So you know what? We'll take out that second mortgage on our house. And so this, this supply chain that people have touted as, potentially creating generational wealth is really creating generational debt. And it's heartbreaking, right? Like, and I'm seeing, people are making decisions based on this misinformation that, they're going to be able to deduct their business expenses next year. So we can dip into junior's college fund or, and this happened during the Obama administration. The clip that you were playing of the Attorney General saying that they were going to stop the raids. They tried, right? They put out a memo. But the U.S. attorneys decided they didn't want to follow that memo. But at that time, remember Obama came in and inherited a recession, a huge recession, right? And so you had all these people, construction workers, real estate agents, everyone in that arena out of work. And they were desperate. And then you had, cannabis consultants and a lot of the business organizations telling people like the water's fine, right? Like open a dispensary. And so, a lot of people went to jail. We had a situation where we had 97 dispensaries open up in Billings, Montana, right? That's like one per person. Not really. It's more than 97 people in Billings, but it was a lot, right? And so, part of what, I think a lot of people coming into the cannabis space, especially if they're coming in through the hemp space, they have no sense of history of how we got here what it took to get here. And I think part of that, it's not by accident. There are definitely a lot of consultants and lawyers that take a lot of credit that they don't deserve for getting us here, when really all of this is happening because of patient advocates. But what it means, though, is that they don't really understand what are the next steps, what has to happen for us to move to the next piece, and they're looking for loopholes and ways around things, right? Which I'm all for loopholes. Like, honestly, we would not be here. We definitely drove some Mack trucks through some loopholes over the years.
Loopholes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Like the first dispensaries were a very exaggerated definition of a caregiver. And I mean, very exaggerated definition of a caregiver. But so I'm all for it, but we knew that that's what we were doing. Right. And, we had I'm working off a chessboard, right? Like I said, like we have a strategy. This, when this happens, we know this next piece happens. Right. And I think, two things that have happened that were not on my chessboard at all. One was that the adult use businesses would come after medical. Like, that was, honestly, I had
mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the worst. And I still, I'm sure we all have this in our lives, but in your career, we had something like we made a big mistake, or for me, it was actually in Washington State. This is the first time I saw adult use come after medical. And I was just so taken off guard that we didn't make the best decisions. Like we got really defensive and didn't stay being proactive, and we lost medical in Washington State. And it kind of created a trend that we're seeing in a lot of the states that have both adult use and medical. And I think, I was trying to find out, for the community, and I'm sure you've seen this on LinkedIn and other social media threads, where people say, there's no such thing as medical versus adult use. All use is medical. I was like, what? I was like, okay, maybe in the same way that, you can have a glass of wine a day or whatever. But I will tell you, not all cannabis is medicine. Right. Like the preparations that we're seeing today, that's not medicine. Right. Like, it's your and people aren't being honest about the safety profiles of these products. So I think that the other thing that people are mistaking the lax nature of enforcement. Like that's the way things are going to be now, that law enforcement is just going to let us do what we want. And this is actually a police tactic that we saw over and over and over again. Los Angeles was actually a major hub for this strategy, which is give them enough rope to hang themselves. Yep. So we actually caught the California Narcotics Officers Association. They were doing a speaking tour in California and in Washington and Oregon, talking to DAs and local police. And their advice was, don't freak out when dispensaries start opening. In fact, don't do anything. And they will multiply so quickly that you will then have the public will come out against them. And then you go after them because the public will be on your side. And that was their strategy. And that's what I'm definitely seeing right now like with the all of these, THC, Delta 8, Delta O, Delta whatever, that are not cannabis. Like I'm just tired of people saying that they are. These products are not interacting with your endocannabinoid system. They're not helpful. And the saddest thing to me, Angela, is you have to get up your nerve to try cannabis, right? Like older Americans, like it's not a little thing, right? Like the war on drugs was like beat into us, not just for the criminal justice side, but all sorts of other shame and which, by the way, I love your No Shame campaign. But it's really built it. So when you finally get up the nerve to go and buy cannabis, what happens if this thing that your loved ones have been telling you to try forever, that you and I know would could be a great option for them, that they don't get cannabis, they get one of these Franken cannabinoids, and have a horrible experience, and they're never going to touch cannabis again. And a lot of it is like, it's like scorched earth strategies. And I think that's, coming back to the US from my hiatus in Europe, I was having a hard time like getting a grip of like, what's the strategy? Like what are these hemp companies doing? Like what are these adult use companies doing? Like I don't understand. Like the banking bill. I mean, the banking bill is a joke. I mean, not a joke. It is. But we wrote the banking bill as a strategy. It was a tactic, like a media stunt, honestly, because we couldn't get members in Congress to be anywhere near cannabis businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like 6 years, we finally got them comfortable with like talking about patients and wanting to help patients, but they didn't want to talk about where we were getting it. And I was like, where do you think this cannabis is coming
from? Right.
And so we came up with this idea. I was like, okay, well, patients are in harm of robberies because they are all cash businesses because of the banks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wrote this bill that was not supposed to be standalone legislation, the first banking bill, 2011. And for a whole session of Congress, we brought businesses up to meet with their members. And then after that whole session, then we were able to get Booker and Gillibrand and Rand to include banking language in the CARES Act, right? Like banking, you can't force banks to do business with illegal. I mean, it's silly, but it's distracting.
Mm-hmm.
Not so great way.
And we haven't gotten far with the MORE Act. We've been hearing about it for quite some time now, and it still hasn't, gotten as far as I think I would like it to go, because of course it's still a cash-based business, and it's very difficult.
The MORE Act is not what people think it is. We have never endorsed the MORE Act, and honestly, I didn't feel like we had to be very vocal because it doesn't have a very good chance of passing anytime soon. But the issues with the MORE Act are some of the similar issues are in the Booker COA, OA, what the acronym is. And then we're seeing in some of the new hemp legislation, and that is putting cannabis in the FDA. And that and it's a dangerous place for the regulations because a lot of the language looks like it's modeled after the Tobacco Control Act. Okay. And so a lot of people don't know that the FDA regulates tobacco. This happened in 2009 was when Congress gave FDA the authority to regulate tobacco. And over a very short period of time, they kept getting more and more power. And I think probably one of the views you see of this is all the flavors went away during that period of time. Tobacco went to 3 strengths. So you could only have like low, medium, and high, and capped of what the tobacco level could be. Vaping is illegal. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but those little stores that sell everything that's almost illegal, right? They have kratom and THC, Delta 8, right? And sell vaporizers. That's a huge illicit market that the FDA created. But they, in order to get a new tobacco product on the market in the United States, you basically have to, do the research that's equivalent to a new drug application, right? Okay. And so if you think about like what's on the shelves right now in dispensaries and in hemp store, like within both of those markets, which I always call that the sparring between those two markets. It's like the war of the glass houses, right? Because you have the regulated places saying, well, that's not safe. THC Delta 8 isn't safe. All of these other cannabinoids aren't safe. But I think, if you turn the mirror back, I don't really think that any of those businesses would be able to prove the safety profile of shatter or any of these really high concentrates. Like they're not investing in safety studies. So if you get the FDA involved, you're going to see, I don't know what's going to be left on the shelves, honestly. Internationally, the serving of THC is 10 milligrams. Well, how many servings is in shatter, right? Like how many? So that's where I would, that was one thing I was questioning. I was like, who's writing this? Like, what's the plan here, right? Like, and then I realized there isn't a plan. That actually, that a lot of there's no thought leadership in that space. I mean, there used to be, like 10 years ago, there was like 4 white guys I could call and yell at, and like, we'd argue it out. But now we really just see these companies that are, like I just feel like they all have golden parachutes, and they don't really care about scorched earth. Like they could give a shit what they leave behind. And so just anyone who is running a business, I would just like think about this, picture this. If you were getting onto an airplane and the pilot and all the staff had parachutes and a helmet on and told you don't get one, are you going to get on that plane? Because that is what all these businesses are doing. They're following the news cycle of these businesses, and all of these guys, they have golden parachutes, right? They're going to get paid no matter what happens, right? They've got exit plans that don't include every mom and pop making it, right? Like that's not part of their ethos. And so, it's a hard thing to say, and nobody really wants to hear it, but what it means on Capitol Hill is that, you have policymakers thinking that they're doing something good, right? Like I know a lot of the authors, like, the MORE Act is another one. The name of that bill, like in its title, it says the words decriminalization. Well, there's a whole section in the MORE Act that creates new criminal penalties. It's not decriminalizing.
Oh, okay.
New criminalizing, right? And so I think that if you kind of break up all the sectors, you have the business people that are like in and out, and we've seen all sorts of waves of different business people. When I started, it was just I called them growers with the heart, or dealers with the heart. They were just like, they were the ones who were experts at cannabis. And then there was this wave of all of the check cashing businesses. Like they all started.
Remember those.
And people that did online gaming and like a lot of cash weird businesses got involved. And then there was like a wave of arrests. And then there were a lot of people within the real estate sector that lost everything during the recession. But they were also property owners, right? So like most of the funds include like, I don't know, like people who owned these warehouses, and they're like, okay, well, how hard can it be to run a cannabis business? So, so I think that, I know that people are, it's almost like they're so bought in at this point that they only want to hear good news. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, why are people listening? And I was like, it's because they have no choice, because they're gonna go tell their wife like this crazy ass cannabis thing that she told them not to do, right? Isn't gonna work out, right? And or you just have to hope that you're gonna get that money back for your kids' education, right? Like people are just so bought in, and then the other side of it is that I feel like people think that it's all being handled in Washington, right? That like, oh, those business guys have it. And it's not, and it's not. And especially for patients, right? I think, something people always ask me, like, what is the big activist thing that needs to get done, right, to move this policy forward? I'm like, have you talked to your member of Congress or your senators about medical cannabis at all? Because like what's happened is that people aren't, and I get it, people are really busy at the local level. You guys are definitely examples, right? You can find a minute in the day, right? Just to that access that's so close to you, right? That's what the people are working on. But in the absence of patients talking to their members of Congress over the last 10 years, there are people talking to them, right? And they're not telling them that patients aren't being served. That's not the picture they're getting. So if your members of Congress aren't hearing from you, they assume that the status quo is working. They assume that the hemp hemp folks, the adult use, they're taking care of you, right? So, they don't need to worry about medical cannabis policy. But
that's truly not the case.
Yeah. And it's not so, I'm 23 years in to this strategy, right? And there have been, we've had to move some huge mountains, right? Like I said, creating product safety protocols for an illicit substance was a project, right? That was 4 years of consensus, consensus organizing. Again, organizing a international patients coalition to change. That took 15 years. So all of these major hurdles, right, that were on my street, they're all gone. Right? Like literally, like we're supposed to be starting Act 2 now. Act 2, right? Like this is now when we talk.
Like you're starting over.
This it's not starting over. It's almost like trying to explain to people why cannabis medicines aren't FDA approved. Right? People hear this from people all the time. If it's a medicine, then it would be FDA approved. You guys just want to get high, right? Like that's
right. That's we hear that a lot.
I'm sure. And the reality is, and I, as I've been working on sort of new messaging for, now I've taken my defensive suit off. Got to get some new talking points for the proactive. And what I've learned is really, I knew that that cannabis isn't the only picked on herb, right? Like when you hear people tell the history of cannabis, I'm sure you've gone to a presentation and they start off with the pyramids, and you're like, oh my God, we're gonna be here forever. We found cannabis in the pyramids. No, but something people usually is in every presentation on the history of cannabis in the U.S. is that in 1942, cannabis was removed from the U.S. pharmacopoeia. Right? Like we always talk about that. Well, if you broaden your vision a little, you would see that it wasn't just cannabis. Actually, 200 natural compounds were removed in a 10-year period from the U.S. pharmacopoeia. Right? It wasn't. This is an area that wasn't just about cannabis, right? And there is some capitalist side of medicine that was involved. But it was also just sort of where we were in science, right? That like, the drug development model that we are working off of mostly still was actually created in 1909. It was a treatment for syphilis, right? It was this sort of magic bullet, single target drug development method where you would find basically the trick is to find a chemical that will just kill the bad germs, but not kill a human, right? And but because of just the bluntness of the scientific tools that we had at that time, that was basically all the humans could understand, right? Like you take a single target, one compound, put it into a human, and see what happens. And with cannabis, polypharmacy is something a lot of people talk about, right? Which is like multiple drugs, different drugs to deal with all of these chronic conditions that have that honestly we don't really understand, which is another challenge to make medicines for them, right? But the cannabis, and because of all of the compounds that are in it, it's not only polypharmacy, it's also multi-target, right? And that the human brain cannot compute that many scenarios, right? That many compounds having that many reactions, but AI can. And we're actually seeing this global return to herbal medicines because it's not the medicine, the plant that needs to get fixed. The plant does what it does in our bodies, and we can feel it and we know it. The problem is that science doesn't know it, doesn't know what's happening, and so we can't have it.
Okay, I understand. I got it.
But aspirin is a multi-target drug. Aspirin, Tylenol. Advil, it does two things, right? It relieves fever and pain. We don't actually know why.
Right.
But everybody can have it, right? Like it has a safety profile.
Right.
So I think part of the future of medical cannabis activism is that we're going to have to hold this space of saying, yeah, we don't know. But what we do know is enough to move forward and to safely get this medicine. While you guys figure out what's happening in my body, we're going to take this medicine.
Right. Because we know it works. We know it works, even though there may not be a full explanation of how and why, but we know what it does. And
you don't even know what dystonia is, right? You know, like I was misdiagnosed like for 5 years. You don't even know what's happening in my body. So how are you going to develop a drug for it? You know, there's 25 million people in this country that have rare diseases, and there are 7,000 rare diseases that have been identified.
Wow.
7,000, right?
Yes.
And scientists don't know what is happening, right? And think about, and actually any childhood cancer is also considered a rare disease.
A rare disease.
And so you're going to tell a parent, no, that you can't try this product that is not going to kill your child. I mean, it's ridiculous. So it's the new advocate. We have to get self-righteous and say, like, look, you know, if these companies, and this is also where you get to this conversation about like medical versus adult use. You know, at Americans for Safe Access, we never envisioned a world where it would be either or, right? Like we left the door wide open for criminal justice reform and for, you know, adult use markets to come right through. And we made it a point in our advocacy to never create a new crime based on medical cannabis. We taught people how to, we created the product safety protocols. We did all of these things to open that door. And when people got across, they're the ones who said, not medical versus, they said adult use instead of. And I think that's where the tension is, right?
And so with that, it leaves us vulnerable as patients, because I don't think that we have the protections as patients, for one, and then medicines that's not designed specifically for us and what we basically need. But not only that, and talking about the protections that we basically need, insurance, that's another one. Because even if you're talking about adult use would take care of that, but for those of us who are patients, we look at the cost of that. And so if it's considered to be medicine, we would like to be able to have that covered under our insurance, where we can pay a copay just like we would if we go to the pharmacy. So so we do have a ways to go on that. So with that, what you're saying, going back to the rescheduling, because I know that that's something that you've been talking about as far as the rescheduling is concerned. And you want to talk a little bit about your new scheduling that you were looking at?
Yeah, Schedule 6. So we have our model legislation, which, you know, over the years has, you know, we've learned a lot, and we definitely have modified. Definitely my experience setting up federal medical cannabis programs in other countries taught me a lot. But the crux of the program is to create a national medical cannabis program that would include, one, creating a new office in HHS, not in FDA. FDA will participate, right? They're just not. They just can't. The FDA is a consumer protection agency. That's what they are. That's why they were formed. And the reason they have gotten this role of determining what is medicine is that they are verifying a health claim on a label. Right? Like that is like FDA. That's now synonymous with medicine in this country, but that's not. They're literally just saying, can you prove that health claim? So we can't, like, nobody can tell you what my disease is, much less tell you what my medicine is doing. And so it's not time for the FDA. Like, once we figure that out, then we'll be like, yes, here, tell me, is that on the label? Right. But for, you know, the the reality is, I know there's a lot of people who are sort of deschedule or die, that are like, if you say anything else, you're basically, ruining their future. But there's some misconceptions there. One is rescheduling is not the same as decriminalization. So descheduling does not mean decriminalization. While it does take cannabis out of the Controlled Substance Act, right? As long as it's being used legally, because if it's being used illegally, it will come back under the DEA. But there are a lot of other crimes besides the Controlled Substance Act, right? So you can go to jail for dietary supplements. You can go to jail for selling food that isn't properly labeled or handled, right? So by just looking at that option as the only way is just short-sighted, because if your goal is decriminalizing, you can decriminalize without descheduling, right? And so over the years, and then we also just have the reality of this country, right? This country is not ready to deschedule. The entire, we're responsible for the entire global war on drugs, right? Like we had to go create a global war on drugs so that we could have one here, because of the power of our states, right? So the idea that is going to happen anytime soon is just not a reality. And so an all or nothing scenario just doesn't make sense, right? When people are like, when we know that people want to see medical cannabis move forward, A, and B, we have been able to decriminalize without descheduling. And one of our first versions of this bill was actually looking at like a Schedule 5A. But there's so much criminal code that exists around all of the 5 schedules. And so that's why a couple countries actually created a new schedule. Germany for a period of time had a new schedule. Holland had one for a period of time, but they're very different systems. They don't have the war on drugs like we have, right? Like when I was talking in countries about changing the schedule, they're like, why? Like you can go to jail, and they're like, no, they don't. I was like, okay. But so it's a realistic way to look forward, a way forward. But in our legislation, we actually remove cannabis completely from under the DEA. Right. So actually the Schedule 6 would be overseen by the Office of Medical Cannabis. Right. And so in this current environment, am I going to put out there like, hey, we're decriminalizing weed in our legislation? I'm not going to lead with that. Right. But read it. Right. Like we're and our legislation day one instructs the Department of Justice not only to expunge people's records, but to pay for it, like proactive, right? Just get rid of cannabis convictions off people's records. Don't make them go get a lawyer and have to go through that work themselves. So there's a lot in the legislation that's true to our vision, that Schedule 6 is a way to create product safety protocols for these markets, and hemp would go under. It also gets rid of this sort of BS hemp versus cannabis, because all cannabinoids would go under Schedule 6. So what would happen if tomorrow, let's say our legislation passed, then all of the USDA licenses that their intention of those plants is to bring a cannabinoid product to market for human consumption, they have to get a Schedule 6 license. Any of the state programs that want to opt in to the national program, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. I don't know why you wouldn't, because interstate commerce goes away. You can sell Schedule 6 to Schedule 6. Our medicine is legal, so we're protected under the American Disabilities Act. We can travel. We can, and yes, pharmacies and other segments of the healthcare system will be able to utilize cannabis. And I think you'll notice I never use the word the combination of the words cannabis industry. And that's because I think that it's a dangerous way to think about cannabis, because cannabis industry only exists if it's under prohibition, right? Like, yes, because it was under prohibition, we had to come up with every single piece for the supply chain, right? But the reality is that once you become legal, FedEx and UPS are pretty good at delivering things, right? Like, there's this whole
absolutely
that we can use, right?
Logistics.
And so by calling all of these businesses the cannabis industry, you have a lot of protectionism happening, right? Where people don't want to see change. You're seeing this with MSOs that don't want their license to grow cannabis in a state where it's probably pretty expensive to grow cannabis. They don't want that to be worthless, right? So there's all sorts of protectionism that's happening. I see cannabis as a commodity that I would like to see in the healthcare industry. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. That makes sense. So where are you now with that? I know that we had the campaign last year of trying to talk to legislators about the Schedule 6. So where are we now? Where are you now with that?
So we are finishing up a back and forth with Ledge Council, which are basically the lawyers for Congress. So you come up with an idea for a bill, and you can write it in as whatever legalese you want. But then these attorneys, double check it, make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. They'll inform you if you're going to be affecting other laws and things that you have to think about, unintended consequences. It also determine what committees the bill has to go through. And so there's kind of a back and forth that we're going through right now. And so we've been, this legislation, we've gone through lots of reviews with patients organizations, with doctors, with medical cannabis businesses, but it's always getting tweaked. So we're doing some of that final back and forth. We have pulled out our chessboard and are looking at, who would be ideal champions to actually pass this legislation. And hopefully we can make those pieces come together. But if not, if we can't get the perfect, combination of champions, we're going to introduce this bill this year, even if we're not moving forward in a introduce to win, right? Like there's lots of reasons you introduce legislation when you do, but I think seeing what happened last session of Congress without having a medical cannabis legislation there, medical cannabis just we were out of the conversation, right? And so, so the bill will get introduced this year. And, I'm hoping that we get that perfect combination of folks. And right now we are, we're running the 100 Days campaign, right? So we have a new administration, and we also have a new Congress, which happens every 2 years. So it's sort of like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? Shakes all of the proposed legislation away. And we look at, what are the things that POTUS can do, the president, what can happen under the executive branch. And there's, things that he can do. He actually can't change the scheduling. He can't legalize cannabis in any way. He doesn't have those powers. But the president can direct HUD to stop evicting cannabis patients from federal subsidized housing. They can direct VHA to allow their doctors to write recommendations for veterans. They can. He can have the OPM, the Office of Personal Management, stop drug testing federal employees. So part of the campaign is asking Trump to do those things, and then the other part of the campaign is making sure people have introduced themselves to the new Congress. This is the 119th Congress. Every single person has 2 senators and a congressperson. They may be returning, they may be new, but no matter what, they need to hear from patients in the first 100 days. So if you go to our website under our campaigns, or if you're following us on any of our social media channels, we have all sorts of actions. So we have a petition you can sign. We have, if you go a little further, so we're calling the campaign the Put Patients First. I think you can probably see some of the messaging where we got that. And we're calling for a compassion agenda for America, which is, passing our federal legislation. And so we also, in a couple weeks, have Medical Cannabis Awareness Week. That is February 15th through the 22nd. And this is actually something we've been doing for over 20 years. And it always starts on 2/15 because that was the first medical cannabis bill in California, was Prop 215. So February 15th. So we have all sorts of activities for people to sign up and join. We have everything from, just sending some stuff out on social media to we're going to be having teach-ins, advocacy, skill building. If you want to, if you love our legislation and wish that you were better at debating it, we're going to have skill building to help you present on the legislation. And on
that's good. Yes.
So yeah, just to get, because look, I talk about this all the time. I'm not that smart. I just say the same things over and over again. But not really. But you just get used to saying it and get comfortable with the questions. And also that week on Saturday on February 15th, we'll have our annual members only meeting. So if you are an ASA member, this is where we come together and talk about strategy and actually get input from our membership. And then on the 19th, and we're hoping that you guys will join us, is that we're calling for a day of action to educate senators. So some people are going to be delivering things to your Senate offices. I know in Atlanta, both your senators have offices there. You can drop off a briefing book. For some people, they're going to be doing a patients first picket. So just on your lunch hour, showing up in front of the Senate offices and educating people that are coming in about the need for senators to protect patients. And May 1st will be the end of the 100 Days campaign. And we are, depending on sort of how things are progressing, we might have a mobilization to DC around May 1st. So keep that in your calendar. But we also may be calling people to come out to DC earlier because we, as much as I would love us just to be playing offense right now, we have a lot of defense coming up in the appropriations bills that could really impact our work. But I would just want to invite people, no matter where you are on that advocacy lane, right? That remember that our top 2 health agencies have found that there's accepted medical use to cannabis, right? Let that sink in, because for 50 years, the framework has been that there's no accepted medical use. And so that meant that right. The impact was that people who were arrested in those raids that we started, I'll just bring it full circle. If you were arrested for running a medical cannabis dispensary, you couldn't bring that up in court. The jury never heard about the medical cannabis law. They never heard, and they couldn't even consider it. Right. Instead, what they saw was you have a license. They see all of these pounds. Yes, you were selling weed. There's no getting around that. But that's the reality, right? That we've had doctors tell us that we're crazy. That cannabis, there is no accepted medical value. People have lost their children. People have, lost their right to choose their medicine at their end of life because of that. The lack of, currently accepted medical use. So, I just invite everyone in your messaging and the work that you're doing. And, we don't get to be self-righteous much, but get on that soapbox and know that that's where you're advocating from. And if somebody tells you that, it should be an FDA approved drug, I think the best argument, really getting comfortable with saying, like, you don't even know what disease I have, right? Like all of these chronic conditions, we literally scientists are saying, we don't know what causes epilepsy. We don't know what causes neuropathic pain, right? So if they don't know that, how quickly is a medication going to come? And I guess I'll leave you with this one other factoid that I'm enjoying using right now. And there was a report that came out last year that was looking at NIH's investment in drug development. So they basically looked at the last 358 drugs that had been approved through the FDA, through that drug approval process. And out of the 358, 356 of those, NIH had made an investment in preclinical work of $1.4 billion per drug. Just let that sink in. So the industry's investment was about the same. So it's about $3 billion to bring a new drug to market in the United States. So very interestingly, NIH has also spent about $1.4 billion on cannabis research over the last 20 years, but 1.29 billion of that was proving the harms. So what I think, you put those two numbers together, there is no pharma solution coming around the corner, right? NIH has not made the investment for pharma to come in and put up just their 1.4 billion, right? Even though in 1999, the Institute of Medicine told NIH that they should be studying cannabis, right? That the National Academy in 2017 said, yes, study cannabis. And so it is intolerable to have elected officials tell us that we have to wait for something that's never going to come, right? And so when we look at the new crisis in medicine, which are these very complex diseases that, again, we don't really 100% understand, we definitely don't have treatments for them either. And so what is going to have to happen in this country is that we're going to have to expand the definition of medicine, because we actually literally cannot afford not to, right? 90% of our $4 trillion health budget goes to chronic diseases. We can't afford this. Like, we're going to have to find another solution. And so instead of feeling like you have to go all the way back to the pyramids to tell the history of cannabis, right, medicines, I also want to invite people to think about cannabis instead as being right on time. Where we are right now with cannabis policy is that it's a medicine that's right on time. And honestly, cannabis probably wasn't that needed by people when we didn't have all these chronic diseases. And so we don't have to make excuses for why. Like literally, here we are. Cannabis is right on time to help us with this new health crisis.
Wow. So I just have some questions for you, like a final question, basically, on this too. Being in advocacy, I know that we've had a lot of efforts out here, and you have done so much over the past 23 years in getting this. And I do commend you for all the work that you've done. I feel that you are a large part of where we are now in the I don't want to say the cannabis space, but in the medical space right now, of where we are right now. But advocacy is tough. What is it that keeps you going? Because there are days we're doing things and we're like, you want to give up. We haven't been in as long as you have. Our GMCS has been around for 5 years now, but to say that you've been doing this for 23 years, please let us know what it is keeps you going and how do you keep going?
You're like, you're crazy, right? I think, look, I think that when you see cannabis work for people, I mean, you can't not do this work, right? What is the option? And yeah, there's definitely we've had setbacks and frustrations for sure. And I think, what I'm constantly reminding myself and others is that I think we often confuse conspiracies with capitalism in this country, right? Like our healthcare system is a for-profit healthcare system. It's not a conspiracy, right? Like the names of these companies are for profit. They're assigned to make a profit. And what is, I guess what the opportunity is in that scenario is that it's just money, right? Like that this is like, it can feel like a lot, like definitely like, and people get very emotional, very very hardened, very focused on the investment they think they've made that you owe them, right? For like I've seen it all, right? But we're going to change medicine, right? Like, and all of us know, if it's not ourselves that are the patient, we know people that we've seen cannabis help. I mean, at this point in this country, everybody knows somebody that cannabis has helped. Even if it's like your crazy Aunt Margie or whatever, like she can walk now, like people are telling their stories, right? And that's happening. But I think, one of the movements that I've studied over the years, to look for guidance is actually the passage of the American Disabilities Act. And a lot of people don't know, it took over 30 years to pass the American Disabilities Act. Before that passage of that act, people in wheelchairs were not allowed to go to school. Like, if you were in a wheelchair, you could not go to elementary school in this country. We're just like, too bad. And the biggest proponents against the American Disability Act were churches, because the American Disabilities Act, one of the things it did is every building built after 1974 had to add a ramp or an elevator. And so churches didn't want to have to deal with that, right? It all seems so sad when you think about it. But the power of that advocacy, right? And some of the actions that they did. There was this amazing action where this group of wheelchair-bound patients went to DC and went to the Supreme Court and crawled up those stairs. I don't know if you've ever been there, and to show that they had no access to justice. And the last person, it took her 7 hours to crawl up those stairs, right? Like, right, you just get the chills, right? Think about it. But from a strategic point of view, what ultimately passed the American Disabilities Act was two things. One is that they discovered that people didn't want to think about themselves being sick. So in our advocacy, if you're like, one day you'll have cancer, like literally the brain turns off, right? Because people do not want to think about their own mortality, right? But what they learned in their advocacy is that actually people, every waking moment, they're in fear of their loved ones being harmed. And so they did this ad campaign of a father sitting outside of a church while his daughter got married in a wheelchair, and a mother sitting outside of the movie theater. Children went in, right? And then all of a sudden people are like, wait, what? Like, oh, my wife can't come in, right? And it really changed sort of how people saw the solution, right? Like, okay, fine, build a ramp, right? Like everyone needs a ramp. And then the other was actually coalition building in the behind the scenes with the trades like trades unions, because actually the American Disabilities Act actually created more jobs than the New Deal because of all that construction, right? So so I think that when things get too tough, I pull out my chessboard, right, and just dive into strategy and figure out how we can move these pieces. And when things get emotionally too tough, we're a patient organization. We've lost over 200 activists, who I know spent literally the last days of their life sitting in a courtroom, right? Just showing court support for somebody that was being prosecuted, or spent the last, days of their life, their family hating them, right? For, coming up to the state legislature to be like, don't don't let this happen to you, right? Norm Smith, who had he actually paved the way for changes in laws around organ transplants for medical cannabis patients. He didn't get one, and like Norm passed away. He was taken off of the organ transplant, but he changed. I mean, he changed and saved so many people's lives, So, so how can when I've witnessed, that sacrifice, and I'm sure as hell not happy with the legacy of privileged Americans for safe access, which is, I think, what we have right now, right? That you just keep going. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to take a break when you can. You have to ask people to tap out. You have to be healthy. You have to make sure that you're not going to die on the steps, right? You got to be able to walk up all of them, and just check your center, right? Like, know why you're doing this, and don't be people are flawed, right? Like, don't be so disappointed when you meet somebody and now they're trying to start a business. Well, people have to make a living, like, I'm not, you just have to let people be people, right? That there's probably more fear and ignorance than malice. And there's a lot of sloppiness and stupidity, but as my grandma said, it's, if being stupid was illegal, we would all be in jail.
And you're right. You're so right about that. And that just brings me to, for all our listeners out there, definitely understand that advocates work hard and don't get paid. It's a lot of what we actually do where we, give of ourselves, and these organizations really do need help. And so wherever you can lend a hand, whether it's time, definitely money, being able to support, because it does take a lot to go to that capital. There's costs to go out there to do what you do. So definitely supporting the organizations is where we really need the help and to live in a hand. Because a lot of times you're doing it by yourself and you get tired.
We should be able to, there are different times. I mean, over the last 23 years, ASA has gone from having, a very tiny budget, which we have now, which is almost no budget, just basically what room do I have on my credit cards this month? But there have been periods of time where we had, the year that we passed the CJS amendment and stopped the raids, we had a $1.5 million budget. So I think that what, people have to remember is that, advocates, we're not like, first of all, whether you're getting paid or not, it's not some sexy job. Right? Like, it is really hard work. Right. And what it means is, like, by donating, it means that that somebody's going to take care of it because you don't have time to do it. Right? Like, you don't you like your job. Trust me. You don't want to go in every moment. So, so I also hope that your listeners support you guys. I know you have a lot of work to do there. And I'm excited to see the work that you're doing in Georgia. So thank you for being a beacon for patients there.
Oh, and thank you so much. I mean, this has been an incredibly important discussion, and we need hands on deck, all hands on deck, to ensure that patient rights are protected. And here at GMCS, we are proud to work with ASA in this fight. Follow ASA in GMCS. Sign the Safe Access for All petition and take action. But I want to thank all our listeners, and definitely thank you, Steph, for being here with us and shedding a lot of light on what you're doing, on what's happening in the medical cannabis area right now. And just want to tell you, we appreciate you. Keep going. We support you, and just everybody, all hands on deck.
All hands on deck.
And thank you for listening. And thank you to all our listeners out there for tuning in tonight. Definitely stay tuned on our channels right now on our YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, definitely LinkedIn. And stay tuned for more information in our next Compassion in Action. Have a great evening.
Hello, my name is Steph Sherer. I'm the founder and executive director of Americans for Safe Access. We are a coalition of doctors, patients, and scientists that are fighting to change the laws around medical cannabis so that patients and scientists have access. Now, this fight is much different than what I thought I would be a part of in my life, but it's taken me along an amazing journey. I started this fight actually as a medical cannabis patient and learned that I too had a lot of stigma that I held in my heart around this issue, and wanted to create an organization that actually could help educate patients and doctors about medical cannabis, but could also educate the public about why people use cannabis, and to really break down some of the stigma associated with people who use this therapy. Now, that has meant that we've created an organization that has members and chapters across the country. We have over 50,000 members and growing every day. And our members are medical cannabis advocates. They go into their communities and help pass laws. They do public education. So if you'd like to learn more about me or Americans for Safe Access, you can visit our website at americansforsafeaccess.org. Again, that's americansforsafeaccess.org. And remember, you want to make sure that these laws change before medical cannabis becomes an issue for you personally or someone you love.